Okay, so we're going to continue on with our little small house here that we've been kind of going through step by step. The next step that I'm going to go through is soffits and fascia, and then little trim details, that sort of thing, and getting little details in the exterior kind of formwork here. So there's a couple different ways that we can go about putting fascia and soffits and that sort of stuff onto our model here. Under the architecture tab, um, under roof, there is a fascia tool. Um, so if I click that, I have the option. So there's fascia flat 1 by 12. I can come in here and change the profile if I want. So there's 1 by 12, 1 by 10, 1 by 4, 1 by 6, 1 by 8. So I'll use the 1 by 8 and we'll say OK. And so basically what I do is I select an edge of the roof. So if I select this edge and then I select this edge over here, and I can kind of work my way around the entire roof edge here. So that works pretty well in this scenario here. I would caution that if you start one like so, and then you go to do it again, maybe you misclicked or something like that, and you want to continue on. Sometimes it will not connect correctly. Um, in this instance, it seems to have worked fairly well. So it looks like everything connected, and it's not that big of a deal. This tool can be a little finicky at times, but sometimes it does work for you. So that seems to have worked pretty well for our fascia running around here. The other way that you could do it, if you end up with problems or you have certain details that you want to include, so maybe in this instance I want to do kind of like a trim detail where this kind of boxes out on either side. You can create all of this using model in place components and create sweeps and extrusions and stuff like that to get the look that you're after. That's the other way that you can kind of go about it. But if you're just doing kind of a simple fascia like I've got going here, it's pretty easy to just go ahead and use the Soffit tool or the fascia tool there. The Soffit tool, on the other hand, basically if we create our Soffit, I want to create it, we'll say level 1 ceiling. So the way that this works is you sketch. So you sketch a boundary and then it jumps that up to the level of the soffit. If you have flat soffits all the way around, that works pretty well. But in our instance here, I've got a lot of angled soffits kind of going through here, and then we'll have a flat something flat going on in here. But for the most part, you're going to end up with a lot of angled stuff. So this tool actually isn't going to work for what I want to do, unless I want to use the slope arrow and create slopes to everything, which is way more of a pain than it really needs to be. So I am not going to use this soffit tool for what I'm doing here. Instead, what I'm going to use is a model in place. And so it brings up this list of a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of categories. What you select here is actually important because how the line works, or how the line weights and everything work, is dependent on what category you actually select here. So if you make your, let's say we weren't making soffits, something that you're really not going to see much. If you were making, let's say, a window or a wall detail and you put it as casework, and then you went to look at it in elevation, all of your walls are probably going to have a heavier line weight than than your casework does and the rest of the model. So whatever you did that's supposed to read similarly to your walls, it's not going to read that way. It's going to actually have a thinner line weight and that sort of thing. So what you select here actually does matter. It also makes a difference in if we select walls and we make something with the wall type, it'll read it as a wall, and it can host windows, it can host doors, that sort of stuff. So we want to make sure that we select the correct category here for what we're doing. So because there's not really an exterior trim category, we're going to call this a casework, and we'll say OK, and we'll call this exterior trim. So basically what we just entered is it's almost like a family editor within the project. So you're basically creating a family specific or a project specific family. So I'm going to go to my south elevation here, and I can use these tools to kind of create whatever I need. You'll notice that I don't have my architecture tab anymore. A lot of the tools that I had available to me before are now gone because I'm within this sort of family editor mode. To get out of this family editor mode, I need to either hit cancel model or finish model up here. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and start kind of building out how this is all going to come together. So I think what I'm going to do, it looks like I may run into a little bit of a problem if I make this soffit sloped here. As this slope kind of continues back, I'm going to run into a problem with how that intersects with kind of a flat ceiling above my opening here. So I think what I'm going to do is actually go in and put in one of those kind of box details around the edge here. That'll give me a flat surface to kind of continue back and create a flat soffit in here. And then I'll do something similar over here to catch the wall that kind of comes out here and the post that'll come down to the porch. So before I go back and kind of change my my fascia there, I can use this fascia kind of as a template. So if I go to my east elevation, west elevation, we'll change that back to a hidden line mode there. I'm going to use this this fascia that's here as a template. So I clicked on extrusion, and I'm going to hit pick a plane, and I can hover over, and if you can't get it to select the entire surface there, if I hit tab, it'll then grab another option, which is what I'm after. So if I create a little kind of box detail for this soffit here, and I want this to be, let's say, 1'9". It's not too bad, especially since we're going to have we've got a 1'6" overhang, so that'll give us a little bit of an edge here that this will drop into. Actually, let's make this, if we've got 1'6", so that's going to be where our overhang sort of stops. We'll have a 5.5" post. So let's bring this in to say that level right there. Actually, I'm going to bring that in another 3/4. Thinking about a detail that I'm going to put on the edge there. Okay, so now that I have this drawn out, I have this this kind of shape that I want my fascia to be. So I have 0 foot 0 and 1 foot as my start and end to extrusions. What is my start and what is my end doesn't really make a difference. it's going to react the same way whether I have the 1 foot here or the 1 foot here. But I know that I want this to be 3/4 of an inch thick. So basically, if I'm looking at this from my west elevation, towards me is positive, away from me is negative. So I want this to go backwards 3/4 of an inch. So now that I've set my parameter here, I'm going to set a material for it, and I'll create a new material, and I'll call this exterior trim. Say OK, and then I hit my green check mark to say OK, I'm done making that shape, and it creates that fascia for me. So now that I have this this fascia created, I can kind of go around the entire thing and create, make sure that I get the fascia all the way around. I don't necessarily, well, since I'm going to do the bird box on this these two, I will need to kind of recreate this entire edge here. So let's create an extrusion here. We're going to place this one on here. So there's their 1'6". Okay, so then I want to move this in so that I can catch my any sort of trim details or anything that I might want to do on the edges here. So if I make those, let's say I go like 3, we'll go 3.5 there, and 3.5 here. There we go. Okay, so then I can hit my check mark again, and it already, because I went through and did it before, it saves what I did the last time that I was creating something like this. So it has an exterior trim already applied, it has the -3/4, so I didn't have to do that stuff again. So then I can kind of come in here and I'm going to set, if you're in 3D mode, it defaults to the floor plan. But if I want to work on, say, this surface here, I can come up here to my work plane, hit set, and then pick a plane and select the work plane that way. So there's another one there. And if I select this one, this should give me my last little one around that side. Then I just have to come in and do this side. Now the reason that I'm going around and doing all of these, rather than just the front of the gables that I add that trim detail to, is because I don't want to end up with these weird lines, these weird connection points, and that I would end up with that because this is a casework in a family. I can't join the geometry of this to the actual fascia tool that's on there, so I would end up with a problem of seeing kind of double lines there. So if I hit finish model, and now I have this this fascia around here, so I can come up here and hit edit, add or remove segments. So I can come in and say, okay, I don't want any of these on here. Okay, so now that all of that has been taken care of, I need to resolve that in my little family here. So I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to go back into that editing mode with edit in place. Okay. And it gave me that error because I got rid of the fascia that was actually the work plane for everything else, but it doesn't really make that big of a difference that that's gone. So I can come in and hit join geometry on all of this, and clean all of those little details up around the edge there. Okay, so I've got this kind of taken care of here. We need to put in our soffits around the edge here, and then do any sort of freeze or any details like that that we might want to include with this. So I think what we're actually going to end up doing, because this is kind of a bland front, we might put in a couple tapered stone columns that kind of extend up a little bit beyond this point. So I'll get into how exactly we go about inputting those here in a minute. But I think I also want to add a little bit of a detail around the corner here. Some sort of almost like a trim detail, like a stucco corner detail and that sort of thing, just to kind of give it a little something at the edges, to fancy it up just a little bit. And we might also do a little bit of a trim detail around the edge of the window there. So what I'm going to do is, for my soffits and that sort of thing, I'm going to come in here and put in a soffit that runs around and connects to this point. So you can do, the best view to do this is either a ceiling view, or sometimes it works out fine doing this in 3D. It's not very often that I like to actually model in 3D, just because there's too many things that could go wrong there in terms of what am I sketching, where am I sketching it, what am I snapping to. That sort of stuff can be a little tricky in 3D. So a lot of times it's nice to find a floor plan or a view that actually looks directly at what you're working on. So I'm going to hit create extrusion, and I'm going to set my work plane to be the bottom of my fascia board there. And then I'm going to come in and say I want the inside of my soffit to be the edge of this. So you can see I've got the edges all taken care of. I need my walls selected here. I'm going to need my inside edge of that, and the inside edge of this, and also this front wall here. So now that I have this kind of input here, I need to kind of trim this all and kind of clean this all up, and then figure out if everything is exactly where I need it to be. So I'll trim that. I'll trim this back here. And that kind of cleans it up just a little bit there. And so I'm going to end up with a board that kind of continues down here, and then extends back for my overhang. So I don't want this sticking out there. I need this to actually move back a little bit. So I'm going to move this back 3/4 of an inch, and I'm going to leave a 1/4 inch detail on the edge there. So I'll move it back an inch there, and same thing on this side. So I will move this back this way an inch. So that gives me a pretty good idea of where my soffit's going to be. I know I'm going to have that post that kind of runs up here that my soffit would kind of have to cut around, but that's a detail that I can work out in like a section or something like that. Excuse me. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is I got to set my start and end points, or my bounds here. I want this to set up in there. It's going to be 3/8 of an inch thick, but I also want to give like a 1/4 inch relief to the edge, to the very front. I don't want the guys in the field to have to make this flush all the way around there. So this is actually going to go up 5/8 of an inch. Remember, negative is away from me, and since I set this here, going up is going to be negative and away from me. So then I'm going to go negative 1/4 inch, and then that should be 3/8 of an inch thick. Exterior trim is the color that I want, so then I'll hit my check mark, and that makes my soffit around the edge there. So I can take this And a lot of times when you're in these editing modes where you're kind of creating something like this, it's nice to be able to have sort of a template or something that you've already created to go off of. So I'm actually going to mirror this over so I know that it's exactly the same on this side as it is on this side when it comes to this sort of detail around there. But now I've got to just edit how this all comes in. So I'm going to align with the front of that edge there, and I can get rid of both of these and then just trim this up here. And that simplifies what I need to do on that side rather than going in and clicking all those lines in and kind of figuring all of that out. That simplifies that a little bit, makes it a little bit quicker and easier to work with. So next I'm going to put in this sort of soffit here. So I'm going to go to my south elevation, create an extrusion, and I'm going to actually pick a line, and I want this to be a 1/4 inch off of wherever I'm selecting. So you can see how that dashed line ends up sitting 1/4 inch off from whatever line that I select, and depending on where I'm at on that line, it'll jump to either side there. So I'm gonna set this up like this, and then I'm gonna offset the entire thing 3/8 of an inch, so I can go around and put all of that in, and then trim this up just like this. Okay, so my work plane right now is the front here, so I want this to sit back 3/4 inch. I'm actually going to start 3/4 inch back, and then going back it should be about 1'6", but it might be just a little bit different than that, but we'll see. So exterior trim, we're good there, so I hit my check mark. Now if I come in here, I want to make sure that this lines up with that. So what I can look at, looks like I've got a little bit, I'm a little off here, so I can take this and kind of pull this edge here down. Oh, so I'm in line this direction. It's this direction I'm not, because I made it 3/8 of an inch, not 3/4 of an inch. So I can take this and pull this over, and it'll snap to the edge there. Same thing on this side, so I can take this and pull this so that it snaps to the very edge of my other extrusion there. Now I need this to be in line with the face of my wall, so I can take the align tool, grab the front edge of this wall there, and then select the very back. You can see how I can grab the very back of that and it'll jump so that it's in line there. Excuse me. Now I also want to clean up these details on the side, so I'll use my join geometry tool again. Grab those two, and that should clean that up a little bit. So now we've kind of got our detail that runs around here. So in terms of soffits, and fascia, that's a pretty simple example of kind of how that works out around the edge there. Gutters, there's a roof gutter tool. Some of the gutter profiles aren't the greatest, but you can create your own profiles and stuff like that. It's exact same way that we created this profile down here on the wall. You just select a profile and it'll take it all the way around. It works in the exact same way as the fascia tool up here does. You just select the edge of the fascia and it'll continue the gutter all the way around. It does not end up putting end caps on it unless that is something that's new to 2018. I have not seen that tool just yet, but we'll get into that and see exactly how that ends up working. But for now, this little section here looks like it's working pretty well. I've got my kind of exterior trim working out. I'll probably do something very similar up here and back here, so that all of this ends up matching all the way around. Okay, so just to kind of speed things up a little bit, I just went through and and did basically the exact same thing as what I was showing you on this front little gable here. I did that all the way around. So now we have our fascias, our soffits, all of that sort of stuff is in there. But the next thing that I wanted to show is sort of this these columns up front that I mentioned. So how do we go about doing that? Is it a new wall type? Is it something entirely new and different? The way I like to approach these is typically I don't like to make a new wall type just because something that's a small detail like that can get a little clunky in terms of causing you problems in plan and in section and that sort of stuff. Just in terms of how it's going to look here. So if I were to create a different wall section and then the stone steps out there, that might end up looking a little bit off in plan, just in how these walls intersect with it. That might not lay out just right. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to go into component, I'm going to do model in place just like we did for our soffits and fascia, and I'm going to come down here and say it's walls. So it's going to be part of the walls like family here, and I'm going to call this stone columns. Okay, so I want basically what I have here. If I go into my wireframe, I have 4 inches of stone sitting on the outside here, but at these points it's going to step out and it's actually going to be like 6 inches deep there where it steps out and then it tapers. So I'm going to go to my south elevation here and hit the extrusion tool and ask me to pick a plane. So I'm going to hit tab to tab through and grab that stone wall there on the front. So I think I'm going to use these sketch lines right now to kind of lay this all out. Maybe I want this to go up 5/9's pretty good. That looks like it should be about where I want it. Maybe I want the very top of this to be about 1.5 feet. I'm basically just going to sketch half of this column, so this will be like my center line, and then the bottom will be about 3 feet, so I'll end up with like a taper or something like that. And if I mirror that across here, I get something like this. Okay, so let's get rid of that middle line and trim this up a little bit. So I'm going to end up with a tapered column that looks something like that. I definitely want I'm going to need my cap on the top there and everything, but that'll come into play once we kind of get this all worked out. Now I'm going to end up with a detail problem here because this is moving over there, so I'm actually going to shift this. So instead of coming here, I'm going to move this out, say 3 inches from that point. So I've got enough room for this to intersect there. So I can die in here and here. These are sticking out 1.5 inches is my overhang off of there. So if I stick out 2 inches beyond that, this should still connect, and I won't have an issue there. So now that I have my, I've got my stone material applied here, and then I want this to come towards me 2 inches, and I want this to go away from me 4, so that the back of this stone is in line with the back of this stone as well, with that wall intersection there. So I'm going to hit my check mark. So now I have this little tapered column there. Now I don't want it to only be basically 6 inches thick. I want this to be maybe 1.5 feet thick, something like that. But I don't want to just extrude this all the way back, because then I'm going to end up with this part of this sticking into my interior space there. So I'm going to go back to the south elevation and create another extrusion, pick a plane. I'll just go ahead and use my my extrusion that I've already got here, and I'm going to use this as my reference line, so I know this is the front face of my stone, and then it's going to sit back 4 inches off of that. So then all of this sits on top of there. So now I'm going back 6 inches because that's the depth of the first one that I made, and then I'm going to go back another foot. So I'm not going, this isn't going to be a 1'6" thick, it's the difference between these two. So this piece is only going to be a foot deep, but since the front is 6 inches deep, I'll end up with an 18-inch deep sort of column there. So I'll hit my check mark. Now in 3D I end up with a nice sort of thick column there. I can hit my join geometry, join those two together, and now I've got a nice thick stone column that sits in there. So I'm going to take this entire thing, go to my south elevation, mirror it across, so that I end up with the same thing on the other side. I need to check and make sure that I join the geometry on this side as well. And now I've kind of got the look that I'm after. With the two tapered columns on either side, I'll need to put sills on the top here, but for now I'm going to finish this model so I can show you how this ends up working. So in my plan, what I've got is basically a mass here, and I'm going to go to my hidden line. So I've got, it shows kind of how this intersects here, but I don't end up with a line where these end up connecting. And if I go to my 3D view and I go to my hidden line, you'll notice I'm not getting that line there because this is actually extending into this form. But because I made this a wall, remember when I went up to architecture component model in place and it brought up that list, I selected walls. Because they are both walls, I can hit join geometry, select my wall, and then select my stone column. I probably want to do it the other way around though. So if I select my columns and then I go through and select my walls there, now in plan I get something that looks a little bit cleaner. Now I get the edge of my sill attaching there, I get the thickness of my stone, but I still get the poche and all my other layers kind of running back behind that. So that way I get that detail that I want without causing myself a whole bunch of issues with how these other walls end up joining and all of that sort of stuff on the interior. So now I want to make the little cap on the very top. So to make the cap, I'm going to, instead of, because I've already attached these to these walls, I'm going to actually make this as a separate piece. Especially because I don't want to cause any problems with these connecting to that point by creating a sweep around the top. So I'm going to call this column caps. Okay, so my column caps here, I probably don't want something as exactly the same as this. It's going to be close, but it's not the exact same profile here because of the thickness of the stone and kind of how that's all working around there. So if I hit my sweep, I'm going to go to sketch path, and I'm going to do this in 3D. I'm going to hit set and pick a plane, and I'm going to pick the very top of this. And the reason I'm going to do this in 3D is because I can select these little lines here on the very top, and I'm also going to select these lines as well before going into my floor plan so that I can see a couple different things here, and I'll show you what those are. So I have the edge of my stucco walls here and here, and you'll notice this is sticking out a little bit further in the front than it is on the side. So I'm going to end up with a cap that's a little different on the reveal is a little different on the front than it is on the side here, which probably isn't what I want. So I may want to shift my my columns actually over just a little bit. So now I'm going to trim this up, and I'm actually going to trim these here and here, and then I can get rid of these because I'm just using these as a reference point for kind of how this is all intersecting. I can get rid of those. Now I know that this is going to intersect right with my stucco wall there. That's 5 inches. This is 3 and some change, so I'm actually going to grab the edge and make this 5 inches. That way I've got the same reveal here as I do here. So now that I've got 5 inches there, I can hit finish. And basically what this sweep is going to do is I sketched a path, and now it's going to ask me for a profile. So I get to sketch whatever profile I want, and then it will automatically extrude that profile around the edge here, around the path that I've created. So I'm going to go to my south elevation, and I want something that's very similar to this, so I'm going to use this as kind of a reference tool here, and move this from that point up to this point here. So I'll have the same reveal and everything there, but I need this to be 5 inches deep. I still want it to be 3 inches tall, so I'm going to grab this, move that to 5, pull this back to that point, and then I need my material to be stone sill. And I'll say OK. Now, one thing I forgot here before I adjust this, so this is 5 inches deep to the outside. I want it 5 inches deep from the, basically from the stone. So this is an 1.5 inch overhang here, so I need to pull that back. So now you see that's in line with that point. Now if I hit my check mark, hit it again, now it creates a nice stone sill that wraps all the way around there with a little taper and everything, same as what I've got on the other parts. So I can take this, mirror this over so that it's the same as what's on the other side, finish my model. I'm going to go back in here, I'll say OK. I'm going to grab this, and I'm actually going to move this over so that this point, I need to figure out exactly how to get this so that it's exactly 5 inches. So I'm going to go into my extrusion here. I want this to be 5 inches. So I'll give myself a little reference point on how far I need to move this over. So that moves over to there. Grab my check mark. There's that piece. Now I need to grab this piece and make sure that that also lines up. So I've got that. I want to take this and move it over to that point with the check mark. Now I'm just going to delete that other one and mirror this across so that I get the exact same thing. Finish my model. Now everything still works out just fine. It's all still joined and everything. I'm going to want to edit these real quick, because when I move this over, this piece also moved. So I want to pull this in on the sides here so that all of this is exactly where I want it. Move this back over here. There we go. Okay, so now we've got our two tapered columns with our caps on them, and that looks pretty good. The one thing you'll notice, I'm having a little bit of a joint issue there. If I join this wall with, say, I want to grab this wall here, now that gets me the joint that I want there. And you'll notice I forgot, when I mirrored this across the other ones, I forgot to join the geometry of these two again, so I'll go in and hit that real quick. Okay, so now we've got our caps, our two stone columns on the front. We got our fascia coming through here. I did go in and adjust this. I basically took this wall here and edited the profile and extended that profile out to the point that I wanted, and then added the exact same wall type here as the other piece that's kind of running across the front here. So the next pieces that we'll get into, I'm going to go around and put in all my little details. They're basically going to be extrusions, so I'll have a header across here. They'll basically be the same as what this is, just smaller details that kind of run around the windows and the corner trim and that sort of stuff. But we'll get into that. But the next thing that we'll go over is basically materials and applying materials to this whole thing and getting to actually start to look how we want. So that'll be the next step.